Hello folks, today's lesson we're going to focus on Anne Frank. Since you're getting ready to read Anne Frank, I'm going to give you some background information to help you as you begin reading it and get a feel for what it's all about. First, who is Anne Frank? Well, Anne Frank was a girl. She was 13 at the beginning of the book, so the same age as all of you, who kept a journal. Her journal was mainly for the 2 years she was in hiding from the Nazis. She lived in Holland or Amsterdam. She was German, but moved to Holland with her family to avoid persecution from the Nazis. However, when the Nazis invaded Holland, within a short time after that, the Frank family went into hiding. They hid in an attic or an annex above Otto Frank, her father's business, and you'll learn more about that as you read the book. But it is her journal. So that's the first thing I want you to understand, is that it doesn't have a plot. It's not a story. It's not even a full biography or autobiography of her life. It is a journal, diary, and so if you're reading it for a plot and you want to know what happens next and you want to see the rising action, you're not going to get that. You're not going to get that. So some people find it difficult to read because there's no plot to keep you moving on. Now there are a few small side stories that develop that you kind of want to know what happens to this person, what happens to that person. But for the most part, it's just a daily journal of what happens. And really, it's more to put you in the mindset of this person, this 13-year-old girl. She's 15 by the end of the book. And put you in the mind of a teenage girl during the Holocaust, during World War II. And to get a feel for what it was like to have possibly been in that situation. So let's talk about a few of the characters. Anne Frank, obviously, is the main person. And we've talked a little bit about her. Margot Frank, you'll meet, is her sister. Roughly 2 years older than Anne, I believe, 2 to 3 years older. So she's an older teenager. She's 16, 17 in this book. Otto Frank. Otto is the father. You'll find that that's probably who Anne was closest to, was her father in the annex. Mrs. Frank, her name was Edith. Edith Frank was the mother of Anne, the wife of Otto. Mrs. Van Daan and Mr. Van Daan were a family that lived with the Franks in the annex. They were friends of the Franks outside the annex, and they agreed to stay with them. They're also called the Van Pels. So their name was changed in some versions of the book, in early versions of the book, to protect their identity, but then later it was changed back. Their actual name is the Van Daans. So you'll hear people, when you're doing research on them, or you'll even hear me go back and forth between the two, the Van Daans and the Van Pels. And their son was Peter, and he was roughly 2 years older than Anne. He was a teenager as well, and so you'll hear a lot about Peter Van Daan or Van Pels in the book. Mr. Dussel was also known as Mr. Pfeffer. He was a dentist that moves into the annex later. He was not there with him the whole time, but he did move in at a certain point. Then we have some of the minor characters. Those were the 8 people who lived in the annex. Then the minor characters were people that helped them, because they had to have people on the outside help them while they were in hiding. So you meet Ellie, who was the secretary at the business who helped them get supplies, came and talked to them on a regular basis. you'll meet Meep. Meep was a worker at the business, but was also very instrumental in getting them supplies and news from the outside. And Meep was alive until just about a year and a half ago. She died. She was the last one from the whole Anne Frank book that lived. And actually, if you go back to an old version of Tiger Prince, you'll see that Hannah Gardner sent her an email and interviewed her for the newspaper through email, and was actually able to make contact with Meep when she lived in Amsterdam until she died, which was a year and a half ago approximately. Meep's husband, or fiance actually in the book, is Jan. Sometimes he's called Hink, but he is her fiance in the book. Then there's Mr. Cofius and Mr. Kraler. They're just two other people who worked in the business and were helpful to the Franks. Now, not everybody that worked in the business knew the Franks were in hiding, but a few of them did, because they needed people on the outside to help keep them in hiding. So that is, in a nutshell, the things that you really do need to know prior to reading Anne Frank. We will get more in detail as you go along, but you will see that Anne Frank is a journal or diary of a 13, 14, 15-year-old girl. Now, at the beginning, admittedly, she's very self-absorbed, but she comes around. Her personality changes as she goes through the book, and so I guess if you want a plot, you can go by the character development as a plot. So that is the basics that'll help you out as you start reading Anne Frank. Till next time.